collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up on the programme this week, well, it's very much about the conference that is currently taking place in Switzerland to try to reunify Cyprus. We'll hear some remarkably similar sentiments from both Greek and Turkish-speaking Cypriots.
We don't have a problem with Turkish Cypriots. We want to live together, but the problem is Turkey.
I don't trust actually Turkish politics, Turkey's policies.
And we'll discuss the very thorny issues that are being ironed out in Switzerland at that Cyprus Talks conference with Professor of History and Political Science, Hubert Faustmann.
Turkish troops make Greek Cypriots insecure and vote no in a referendum because they remember 74 and believe that Turkey might attack again and use these troops as a springboard. And Turkish Cypriots remember 63, 64 and feel that the Greek Cypriots will redo what they did in 63 and 64 and deprive them of their political rights.
The news in Cyprus this week is dominated, understandably, by the conference taking place in Crans-Montana, Switzerland, to try, yet again, to solve the decades-old Cyprus problem. The leaders of both communities, Nikos Anastasiadis and Mustafa Akinci, accompanied by large delegations of advisers and political party leaders, arrived on Tuesday, with the conference scheduled to begin on Wednesday. Also present were the Greek, Turkish and British foreign ministers, representing the three guarantor powers as outlined in the Zurich and London agreements of 1960, which marked the founding of the independent Republic of Cyprus. The EU's foreign policy chief, Federica Mogherini, is also at the conference as an observer, and the United Nations Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, is expected to arrive at the Swiss resort today. Although great progress has apparently been made over the last 2 years of negotiations, the talks stalled earlier this year, and many observers say this could be the last chance to reunify the island. Failure, they say, will lead to partition. So what are the hopes and expectations of Cypriots? Both Greek-speaking and Turkish-speaking Cypriots seem agreed on the desire for a solution, but they also have doubts about whether the conference will achieve its goal.
I'm not so confident about the solution because it's not between Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots. It has to do with Turkey. I'm not so sure about Turkey.
But do you think that Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, if there is an agreement, can live together in peace?
I believe that, yes, they used to also. They used to live before.
Of course I want the solution, but I'm thinking there is not going to be a solution.
Why?
It's difficult. According to what I'm listening every day from the television, it's a little bit difficult.
What do you think the problem is?
I think, well, the Turkey, for us, is Turkey. We don't have a problem with Turkish Cypriots. We want to live together, but the problem is Turkey. If Turkey is willing to help for a solution, I think there will be a solution.
Do you want a solution?
I guess yes, but I'm not so. I don't think that is going to be a solution and easy for the two parts, I think.
Do you think that the two communities in Cyprus can live together as friends?
I think yes. A long time now that happened this, and most of the people, they don't have problem with the other side, and I think the problem is what solution they have to find so they will live peacefully and everybody will be happy.
I mean, statistically, it has been. I mean, how many years? 50 years, something like that. I hope there will be a solution, but I'm not sure.
What do you think may stop there being a solution?
I mean, I trust Akinci. I don't trust actually Turkish politics, Turkey's policies.
Do you think the Greek Cypriot side is ready for a solution?
No, I don't think. They're not ready.
But you also don't trust Turkey, so it doesn't look very good.
No, it's not good.
What do you think would need to change to make it possible for Cyprus to be reunified?
What needs to be changed? I mean, I don't know if there's anything that you can change and everything will be ready. I mean, it should have been a long process of education and other policies to build the peace. But none happened until now, so I don't know how it will be.
Do you think there will be a solution this time with the talks in Switzerland? Do you hope there will?
We don't know. When Cyprus problem started, I was 6 years old. Now I am 59, so I stopped thinking whether there will be solution or not.
But do you have children? Do you hope there's a solution?
Yes, I have a son.
And do you want a solution?
Yes, everybody wants, but we don't know what will happen.
Of course I want a solution. But I'll be honest with you, I don't think there's going to be one.
Why?
How many times have they come and gone? How many times? A lot. Turkey will not budge. Turkey, what kind of solution? I want my property back. What kind of solution? Just to open the gates here and let everybody in and out? That's not a solution. I'm a refugee. I need my property. Am I going to get it? I don't think so.
Do you think Anastasiades is prepared to make concessions so that you do get your property back?
I'm not only worried about my property, I'm worried about Cyprus. I don't really care about my property. I've lost it anyway. I think Anastasiades is the most... he's the only one that can sort of bargain. Go a bit back, go a bit forward, but the Turks have to do the same.
A random selection of Cypriots speaking to me earlier this week in central Nicosia, and their scepticism may prove to be justified. I asked Hubert Faustmann, Professor of History and Political Science at the University of Nicosia, what he thought would be the outcome of the conference.
I think there are three possible outcomes. The first, and least likely, is a success, a breakthrough with a framework agreement to be negotiated in the next weeks to come and then spilled out in detail in the months to come, and we are going for a referendum soon. To me, that's the least likely scenario. It's not impossible. It will decisively depend on an agreement on security. If this is reached, we will see a success. If there's no agreement on security, the conference will fail. Or, and that's the second scenario, drag on. No side wants to be blamed for the failure of the talks, and therefore to agree somehow in a face-saving way to put things in the freezer until after the presidential elections in the south in February 2018, and possibly the elections in the north. The third is an open failure, and the international community saying this effort has come to an end. I don't think anybody has an interest in that either, so I would go for the middle ground. Some minor progress, some face-saving way out, some stoppage of the talks because of drilling activities that might resume in mid-July, which would bring through a halt, so we have a natural deadline there by which the talks have to have reached such a stage that drilling will not derail the talks.
Let's talk about that first scenario that you think is so unlikely. How far is that down to the attitudes, you think, of the Cypriot leaders? Because we've seen them toing and froing on this for months now. And how far is it down to the attitudes of Greece and Turkey?
Well, all four hold a key, and all four need to move in order to reach a deal. Each of them can be a spoiler. They don't have the same weight, the same contribution. Turkey, to me, is decisive here simply because the Greek Cypriots and Anastasiades need a very, very good deal on security, or there's no chance to pass whatever is agreed upon in a referendum. Everybody knows this, and he knows it as well.
Do you think the Turks know it and are willing to play ball? Would it be in their interests?
This is the big question. This is exactly the question what this conference is about. Is Turkey serious? And this is where we're actually in the decisive phase, by seeing what is really being put on the table by Turkey on the security question. How far are they prepared to go? This is the decisive question. It revolves around there. How far then is Anastasiades prepared to go away from his maximalist position of no guarantee and no Turkish troops, which will not bring us a deal either?
But we also know that there is no way that if they come to an agreement, the day after, however many Turkish troops are in the north of Cyprus, will board a ship and leave.
No, I mean, there will be transitional arrangements. Nobody says they will leave the
But
next
is
day.
Anastasiadis prepared to accept transitional arrangements? This seems to be one of the keys to me, because this idea of red lines and no Turkish troops is obviously not going to work.
Well, if he insists on immediate implementation, there's not going to be a deal. But if he insists that the compromise ground is on transitional arrangements, a phased departure of Turkish troops, which a large number of them leaving very, very quickly, which should address Anastasiadis' concern to deliver on that front, and definitely at least a sunset clause, an end date for the complete withdrawal of Turkish troops.
And what about the Greek troops on the island?
They will go in parallel. This is not a problem, because Greece will back up the Greek Cypriots on their positions, whatever they take. So if Anastasiadis goes very hard on security, Greece will go very hard on security and guarantees as a guarantor power. They have their own goals and possibly even their own agenda, but we haven't seen them not backing the Greek Cypriots up if they would shift. But Greece has always said they don't want to be a guarantor power, and they're more than happy to withdraw their troops. So coming up and saying we're not going to withdraw our troops is an unlikely scenario. If Turkey is prepared to do this, Greece will do it as well. The question is Turkey prepared to do it, and what arrangement will be made to address the security needs of the Turkish Cypriots? And to what extent does that include Turkish troops?
To what extent does it include the Cypriot National Guard?
That's another question. There's a scenario that there will be a Cypriot army after reunification, and it has to be made very clear that they don't become a threat for any of the communities, but a security asset. That's one of the many problems we're dealing with. But that's a secondary problem. If you mean the Greek Cypriot National Guard, the question will be the simultaneous demilitarization, a complete demilitarization of all sides, and then you rebuild a new force. These are questions, but they to me are more technical. More decisive is what happens with the external troops. With the domestic troops, you can quickly adjust this. You can have corresponding numbers. So Turkish troops will withdraw in the same way that Greek Cypriot and Greek troops demilitarize. So you get a military scale-down de-escalation in equal numbers. This is easy. Once you agree on what your end goal is, then that's a question of negotiating in good faith and coming to a fair agreement to both sides that demilitarizes the island as fast as possible or reduces it to the military size desired by the sides.
And what about the fears of the Turkish Cypriots? If you look back at the history of the 1960s, they have concerns which are not very often recognised by the Greek Cypriot side.
I agree, they need to be recognized. We have a classical security dilemma here, and as long as the Turkish Cypriots feel that only Turkish troops and a Turkish guarantee can provide for their security, we will get no deal. We have to get out of this. So Turkish Cypriots have to get a guarantee for their security that might include Turkish troops, for example, under an international command. So they need a credible security provider. That's the dilemma here. Turkish troops make Greek Cypriots insecure and vote no in a referendum because they remember 74. And believe that Turkey might attack again and use these troops as a springboard. And Turkish Cypriots remember 63, 64 and feel that the Greek Cypriots will redo what they did in 63 and 64 and deprive them of their political rights. So both sides need security providers, but you will not get a deal if Turkey is permanently there, but you also will not get a Turkish Cypriot yes if what is come up with is not sufficiently safeguarding them. And that's one of the big problems. For a transitional period, if you have Turkish troops on the island, and let's say a guaranteed treaty of implementation, they're safe. The interesting question to me is if you agree on a sunset clause, on a complete withdrawal of Turkish troops with the approval of the Turkish Cypriot community, something like this, so that they feel safe enough, will there be the European Union or another security provider with a mandate to step in case such a scenario happens? It's one of the big problems in the talks.
Well, I was going to ask you next. I mean, we've talked about Greece and Turkey, but of course the European Union is there. So what role could they play in facilitating this? And one of the ideas that's been mooted on several occasions is this idea that a European police force or army, not necessarily, but some form of security force that is manned by EU personnel could step in during this transitional period. Is that feasible?
More feasible is a mixture. The UN troops are more likely. That's easier, also mandate-wise. The European Union doesn't have an army yet and not a really great record of providing troops. Plus, Turkish Cypriots might feel they're not credible because the Greek Cypriots are seen as member of the European Union. So, of course, after solution, they would also be members. But the European Union has so far no record and no mandate to intervene in internal domestic affairs of a country, like a violation of a constitutional order in a military way. So as long as the European Union is not evolving in that way, they can support, but what Turkish Cypriots need is security against the Greek Cypriot attempt to deprive them of their political rights or to undo the deal. And probably a UN-mandated force under Chapter 7 is a much more powerful one, or OSCE troops, or a mixture out of EU, OSCE and NATO forces that might do different tasks. And you can hope for the EU to evolve, and then maybe in 10 or 12 years' time, when there's a sunset clause for Turkish troops who might be under international command, part of this force supervising the implementation period, maybe then the EU is in a different shape, given the debate we have in the European Union, and might be a credible security provider for the Turkish Cypriots. Or trust has grown to such a degree that what such a big issue today might not be such a big issue in 10 or 12 years' time. That's a dream come true scenario. But for the time being, Turkish Cypriots need a credible security provider, and Greek Cypriots need to get rid of the Turkish threat. That's the big problem what this conference is about. To find common ground is possible, but difficult.
And what about this document that Espen Barth Eider put together as a way forward in terms of the protocol and progression of the talks, which apparently has now been abandoned? What was the problem with that?
I don't really know, because I haven't seen the document either. I know that one element was a treaty of implementation, which in theory is an extremely good idea, meaning all sides commit to their obligations during a transitional period where you go from one state to the affair to the other state.
And that was a Greek Cypriot request, was it not?
It actually is an idea that was developed by several NGOs and submitted to both leaders via EIDE as a good idea to replace, for example, the Treaty of Guarantee with a Treaty of Implementation that could have specified, for example, that any dispute or any non-implementation or any accusation that not one side doesn't stick to its part of the deal will immediately be referred to an international court and its verdict is binding. So to provide guarantees that what has been agreed upon will also be implemented. So as such, it's a very good idea, but it got discredited because in the Greek Cypriot perception, and in the way apparently Ida put it in the document, so I haven't seen it myself, this is only what I've heard, is that it gave Greece, Turkey kind of executive supervising authority to check if what they had to implement is actually implemented by themselves, and that seemed to have discredited the document.
In modern political terms, how realistic is it to draw up a new constitution, which is what we would have to do in the best case scenario, and to still have outside countries with, in a sense, a veto, a say-so, a guarantee, or whatever else it is? It seems extraordinary in the years that we're living in that a country would allow anybody else to have that power.
Well, I agree that this should be overcome, but we have the security problem of the Turkish Cypriots that's affected by such an end arrangement. That's why I do believe we have to distinguish between an agreement, an interim period, and a final stage. In the interim period, I don't think there will be a right to intervene, but there will be a commitment by all sides to stick to their side of the deal, to withdraw their troops, to return territory. All of this has to be stipulated, all of this has to be implemented. And one of the problems with the Annan plan was that the Greek Cypriot concessions were made immediately, and the Turkish and Turkish Cypriot concessions occurred over several years and up to 18 years. And Greek Cypriots, for some reason, argued there was no guarantee that the other side would stick to their deal. So the nice thing about the Treaty of Implementation is that it finds a binding framework that guarantees you the maximum security you have, that sides stick to the deal. And that's why
they don't agree to it.
They have to come up with something that is named differently, but doing the same thing, maybe in a different form than it was proposed by EIDE. The problem was not to propose a Treaty of Implementation. The problem was that the Greek Cypriot side perceived the Treaty of Implementation to give Turkey intervening rights and executive rights to supervise what is going on.
Okay, so let's talk about how serious you think both the Cypriot leaders are about reaching an agreement. We know what they say for domestic consumption, and we have no idea whether they say something differently, I'm pretty sure they probably do, to international players involved in this. But if we look again at the Greek Cypriot side, because that's the one I'm most familiar with, if it comes to a referendum, I think it's highly unlikely that the majority of Greek Cypriots would vote yes, whatever the deal is brought, because there is still this very large percentage of the population led by the rejectionist parties who simply don't want to change the status quo.
I mean, you merge two issues in one question here. The one is if the two leaders can agree on security. This will be extremely difficult, in particular because Akinci, whom for me is the most desperate for a solution and the most likely to agree to a solution has to make concessions on an issue that's vital for his community. That means he has to give a deal that's very good for the Greek Cypriot. And that links your first question with the second. It is indeed true that a large percentage of the Greek Cypriot population, for good and for bad reasons, will be opposed to a deal and will be extremely difficult to get an approval in a referendum. If we don't have a very good deal on security, there's a guaranteed no in a referendum. So anybody who wants to solve this problem has to address the Greek Cypriot fear of Turkish intervention and Turkish military presence. And we have to get this out in a way that at best has a sunset clause that is acceptable, and it replaced with something that's safe enough for the Turkish Cypriots to say we don't like this at all, but we'll jump, we take the leap of faith. And if this will not happen, the negotiations will fail. That's one reason why I'm not too optimistic.
But the other thing is that both leaders need to take a leap of faith if they are serious about going down in the history books as the two leaders who finally solved the Cyprus problem and reunified the island.
Absolutely. All four sides. But Turkey is also decisive here. We cannot exclude Turkey. If Turkey somehow, through the deal, signals it wants to keep its strategic control over the island, and more than a say it has anyway by its influence in the Turkish Cypriot community, which is one of the arguments that scares Greek Cypriots and will push many to vote no, then Anastasiadis cannot settle because he knows exactly he will get a Greek Cypriot no. And that for the Greek Cypriot community, the ultimate disaster is a deal that's rejected by them and accepted by the Turkish Cypriots. That's the worst possible outcome from a Greek Cypriot perspective. And if Anastasiadis comes to the conclusion he can't get a deal that gives him a chance for a Greek Cypriot, yes, then it would be politically foolish to settle, and he would rather want to drag on the process and try to shift the blame game on as many shoulders as possible, which I believe is the most likely outcome.
Two final questions. The one is obviously with the presidential elections coming up in the Republic of Cyprus. Do you think that if no deal is reached, Anastasiadis has a hope in hell of getting re-elected?
It will be very difficult to get re-elected anyway. What he probably hopes for is that it's so close, that there's so little left that has been delayed because of the presidential elections, that we will sell it, that we can settle it if you re-elect me. I need a little bit more time.
But we've been there before. Nobody's fooled by that anymore.
That's his problem. To me, the elections in February are highly unpredictable. He has not officially announced that he's running again, but he's behaving like somebody who's running again. His problem is that those who don't want a solution, the more rejectionist, more hardline, more fearful elements of the Greek Cypriot,
are not going to vote for him anyway.
They're not going to vote for him anyway. Those who were desperate for a solution, for whom he was the man of hope, he will not have delivered and has maneuvered in the last months in such a way that they lost faith.
So they won't vote for him either unless he comes up with a deal.
And that's his problem. So if you go into the scenario that there's a deal, my explanation afterwards would be he realized that his only chance of political survival is that of a deal. And that might be very well true, but a lot will depend who's running against him and who is, if he manages to the second round, who's running against him in the second round.
Right, and the very final question, last time we discussed this issue, we mentioned Russia. And there's been quite a quiet time from the Russians on this latest conference. Has their view changed? Because I think it's fairly well established that they aren't that keen on a Cyprus solution. What can they do? Will they do it through the political party leaders who are going to the conference as well?
Well, I belong to those who are sceptical about the constructive role of Russia in the sense that they want a solution. I don't think they need to push the leaders of the rejectionist party to object to whatever will be agreed on. So they do the work anyway. Or their agendas match. That's maybe the best way to put. I don't think they will be convinced of any compromise reached. These rejectionist leaders are rejectionist for many years, and we cannot expect them to shift positions just because there's a deal in hand. So the usual suspects, Tiko, EDEC, the Citizen Alliance, the Green Party, the Solidarity Movement. Yeah, these are rejectionist parties that don't accept the kind of deal that's feasible. So Russia doesn't have to push these people to object to what's happening. But you're right, we haven't heard much. That's all I can tell you as well. Yeah, but things might go their course anyway.
Is it a good idea for them to have been asked to accompany the president? Well, they messed it up quite successfully last time.
Well, it's a ritual that's part of the Groundhog Day experience Cyprus talks have been. They go there, they will object to where everything is agreed or for any compromise that's made at the conference and make their negative voices heard. For me, it's a waste of taxpayers' money, but it looks democratically really nice because all forces of the Greek Cypriot community are there. So ask me as a Democrat, it's a very good idea. If you ask me as somebody who might want a positive outcome of the conference, they will not contribute to a positive outcome of the conference. They will contribute to the failure of the conference, and that is predictable.
Hubert Faustman, Professor of History and Political Science at the University of Nicosia.
In collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
The biggest achievement of Crime Stoppers has been the ability of the public to be able to give information about crime anonymously.
There's no way I could have kept prostituting without the drugs. There's no way I could have had my body used like a public toilet, because that's actually what prostitution is.
And then the fourth series I started 3 days after I'd won the Oscar, so the whole of the Monarch of the Glen experience was all interplatted with the Gosford Park Oscar experience.
I was working with Ronnie James Dio, and David was going to reform Whitesnake in 2003.
Cyprus was chosen because Cyprus is a stable, peaceful and secure place.
We have to really look closely. What are we doing with children? What are we doing with adolescents? And what are we doing with adults that can help them move into a more literate situation?
The ones that I'm proudest of are the ones that were true discoveries, where we found something we didn't know existed.
Well, the weather in Switzerland, at least, is reasonably cool, even if things might be heated around the conference table. Here in Cyprus, well, it's just been heat, heat, heat. Earlier in the week, the thermometer was hovering around the 40 degrees Celsius mark, and the usual warnings came into play. Stay indoors, stay out of the sun wherever possible, and the multi-purpose centre run by the Nicosia municipality was open for the frail and the elderly, and indeed anyone who didn't have air conditioning and needed to escape the heat. That usually carries on throughout the summer. In the meantime, there have been fears as well for forest fires following, if you recall, last year's huge blaze in the Solea Valley up in the Troodos Mountains. And the message from all the relevant authorities, the Forestry Department, the police, the fire brigade, is don't light fires, don't go and cook souvla and souvlaki up in the mountains. You need to be super special careful. And another warning has gone out as well to farmers not to burn their stubble, because that usually causes fires every year. Incidentally, for those who remember the Solea fire last year, some good news is that regeneration is already starting to show. So apart from the work the Forestry Department has done, the forest itself is beginning to grow back.
Listen online to the Cyprus News Digest on YouTube or at cyprusmail.libsyn.com. The latest program is uploaded every Friday, and if you missed one, you can catch up there.
Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.